I'm coming here just to give a different perspective of the challenges that we'll face in terms of adoption and the trust, unless we take these two things into account in terms of the privacy as well as the security. So there are certain things that I'll be very particular about in this talk. There are a lot of you who have listened to this kind of similar talk that I have been giving, but there will be an aspect where I'll be focusing on certain things, which is a new dimension, on a new angle through which, bridging the gap between not just understanding in terms of the security and privacy in the technical term, but understanding in the society perspective as well. So as we go along, it's not working. It's fine. I think I can use the clicker there. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It should be all right. Is the mouse connected? Yeah, a bit slow. All right. Okay. Just to give set a tone or set a scene on the perspective of why this is very critical and why this is very important. Is given the data that if you look at the report that you see, one of the most recent one is the IBM. If we look at the report through which the intelligence report that they're provided, it's very interesting. In last year, we were the 7th most attacked in terms of the healthcare domain. And as you know, I'm talking about the care robot, which directly links with the healthcare. So that's why that is also taken into consideration within this domain in terms of the 7th most attacked organization that we can see. So when we looked at it, 7.8% of all cyber attacks. Previously it was 5.0 and it has jumped up to 5.8 from the previous year, from 2021 to 2022, if you look at the report. And interestingly, we see that this healthcare sector, when we looked at it, this time, the IBM, they have reported mostly focusing on Europe and the American, okay, rather than focusing on all different countries. So the statistic in terms of this 58% of the incident that they're talking about is perspective to the Europe and the North American, okay? So they are just evaluating this year in 2023 with respect to these two domains, these two continents, or to these two areas. So we can see like 58% of the attack is happening within these two continents in with respect to the healthcare related cyber attacks. Okay, so that's a very high, if you can see. So if we looked at this, that's okay. So why is this happening? You know, it's happening all the time. We hear all the time. We see all the time even. So why is this happening? Is most of the, if you look at the literature, and in fact, this is also very true. I hope you can also relate to what we do daily, or with the things that we do and interact with the internet, and the things that we do with technology. Is most of the attack or most of the thing happen because of the human error. So some would say 80%, some say 90%. Even IBM goes to the extent of saying 95% of all the cyber attack is because of our fault, not because of the technology, not because of the security mechanism and technique, but because of human error. And if we look closer to the UK perspective, you can see in the Age UK report, it says every 40 seconds, older people become a victim to cyber fraud related. Every 40 seconds. So you can imagine, as I'm talking, so something has been, someone has been somewhere within the UK has become a victim of cyber fraud. So you can imagine that we are moving towards all this intelligent, connected, smart technology. But if we are not careful and aware of this thing that is happening with the human error, if you can see, like as I said, 95%, or even if you say 90, or even if you say 80%, so that's a lot to be accounted for, from the human perspective. So that is where the real challenge comes into picture. It's not about the mechanism. If you think of the RSA algorithm, AES algorithm, we have been using for ages, right? So it's not the algorithm that the problem is. It's not the SHA algorithm that is creating a problem in terms about integrity and so on. So it is a problem with you and I. Suppose that when we say, let's create a password, how many of us really think about creating a strong password? We think of how we can remember that password, and that's the way how we create it, right? And that's where social engineering comes in, and I can figure it out what and how it should look like, and boom, it has been hacked. So it's very interesting, like how the human social perspective come into picture. And now, as I'm talking on this domain or on this topic, as I'm talking about care robots, as you can see, like this care robot, they are going to take care of people. But generally, if you look at the literature, or if you look at general adoption, there are two specific domains that they target: children and elderly people. Okay, children and elderly people generally. Or when I say elderly children, it includes probably with disability. It could include any form of mental health related, where we want to have assistive robots taking care or support and so on. So when we think of these things, a robot going to take care of a human being, going to provide an interaction and instruction, or probably guidance or reminder by this machine. Now, unless think of it like in the real sense, like where we struggle to even trust human beings. We are living in this 21st century, and we seem to fail to even trust human beings. And now the system says, now we have to trust this piece of robot. Now, how much and how far can we trust? If we don't take certain things into account and consideration when we build and develop and design this, it's going to be a disaster. And this disaster is going to be catastrophic. Do you know why? Obviously, we know the reason. Why? Because when we say we don't trust, we don't regain the trust easily. I know a lot of people, especially there was one elderly, older person, like around 67 age, 1.5 years ago. So I was trying to help him. So, this phishing email that comes in and they say, oh, click this, a delivery has been missed, click this. And then he ended up providing his credit card details, his personal email ID, his personal information. And then now things are going really bizarre after that. Now what happened with this person is, he said, I am never ever going to use smartphone. I'm never ever going to use internet connected facility. I said, no. It's not like that. We made a mistake, but he said, no, I don't trust the system. But remember, it was us who made this mistake. It was us who clicked this. But still, it was very difficult for him to gain that confidence, that trust to use that system. So think of it in terms of the robot, a piece of metal, like a computer shaped in the form of a human being, maybe, or in whatever shape we have, like Alexa, not in the shape of a human being, but we interact, right? I don't know how much information is gathered by Alexa Cloud, I don't know, by Amazon, and then we just trust it, and we have been using it. The day will come when the compromise will happen. The day will come when the data leakage will occur. That's where everybody will start getting panicked. Do you remember, like when 500 million of the Facebook account user, they said it has been leaked. I don't know if you remember a couple of years ago, and a lot of our friends, they said, that's it, I'm not going to use Facebook anymore. And these days, if you see, very interesting, the nature of how the social media is playing. Think of it like, if you Google and check Jim Smart on Facebook, there will be 3-4 accounts, and one of them is me. The rest of them are not me. Someone else has created, downloading my picture, collecting all my credentials, and a new Facebook account under Jim Smarter. Which one is me? There are 3 of them. One of them is me. See? So it's very interesting, when we go into cyber, how do we even trust which one is who in the cyberspace? So this system is going to be used or going to be adopted by this, let's say, generally elderly generation or the children population. If that is the case, it's very sensitive in nature, right? Now think of it when we grow older. Now, when we're a bit younger, we say, oh, I can handle things, I can manage, I have the skill, I have the knowledge. But as we grow older, things will change, we'll start forgetting things, right? So we can't just assume just because I have a technical skill, when I'm 85 or 90, I will be able to do what I'm able to do now. That will not be the case. Think about the population who doesn't have this skill set, and it will be the worst. But now we say, okay, shortage of staff for healthcare, shortage of nurse. We say, oh, here is a robot. Let's start using it. Let's start using it to fight, the shortage of people providing services in the healthcare sector. And then if that becomes a reality, if we don't really take into account the security perspective and privacy perspective, I'm telling you, it's going to be a nightmare, right? It's going to be a real challenge. So vulnerable people, that's what we are trying to protect. The data that is generated by the vulnerable people, the data that is generated from the vulnerable people. So it's sensitive in nature and it's private. And we want to protect that information. So, all right. So keeping that in mind, now when we say robot, it's very interesting. Like there are certain things that we have to consider. This is really, really important. Those of you who are students and working on the research, you might want to think about this. Now, here is this the robot system. Here is the security technique and mechanism or privacy mechanism and technique that you want to incorporate. Remember, all these policy, laws, and regulations are there, sitting there. That's not going to help you. That says, oh, here is a regulation which says if you steal, you will go to jail. People still steal, right? So regulation and law will be there to keep and check and protect. However, that's not really going to protect you. Okay, that's not really going to protect your life. your data. So we must do something in the way how we design and develop this system. So mechanism, and there is a user. So for me, I see these three things. And then we are looking at a reason where we meet, like say, okay, so secure that nobody knows how to use it. So that should not happen. And they say, okay, this RAS system, we want to make it use, but the security mechanism technique, when we put it, it doesn't work anymore, right? So those of you who are doing work with me would have seen like when we encrypt information, multimedia, and then how it slows down, right? It literally like you wait like for a minute to get the information. And then it's very interesting. So we have to consider the functionality of this system as well. So if you are interacting, you're just buffering. That should not happen. It should be at the fly, at the go. And what about the user? Now, as I say, when I say elderly, I'm not just taking extreme case, but this is the domain where we are really focusing on. So think of it, the user. Like, can they remember things? Can they do things? Do they have the skill? What about their physical ability? Okay, physical condition, mental condition. So we have to think all those aspects when we are designing and developing. So the user perspective, take into account. The RAS perspective, take into account. Security and privacy mechanism, take into account. And then we are looking for a trade-off with the best bits of all these three. Say, this is the best situation in which we can work. And the worst situation, if we looked at it, if we looked at the user, the robot, and then we start integrating of the smart system that is around you, to make a better, well-informed decision or a quicker decision. We say, let's integrate the smart home facility and sensor with this robot. And that's going to drain his computation. All right? And on top of this, okay, if that is the case, let's connect to the cloud. That's what the Manchester University. Let's connect to the cloud and let the computation be done by the cloud. In fact, even the Amazon, the Alexa that you are using is just taking the input, processing somewhere, throwing out with the output. So processing is done somewhere else. So cloud becomes innovative, that kind of, you can't avoid, you can't run away from the cloud services these days, isn't it? So because of that, say, because otherwise the cost will literally go up. We have one robot, I'll show you one of the pictures that we have. Nearly a 200,000 pound robot, as our robot group team that are working on. So you can see it's really expensive. If that is the case, they say, okay, let's put more computation power, we'll just increase the cost. They say, let's use the cloud. That's what people will do generally. But I don't worry about that much because somehow we can have the standard security mechanism and technique in place. But the thing that I'm going to highlight is a little bit different from this general security mechanism and technique. Just to give you an overview, obviously, if the RAS system, how do you guarantee the service availability, the integrity of the service? How do you know that the information that is providing is something that it is? It has not been changed, it has not been altered. And how do you guarantee that this service is available all the time? Many times, that's what happens with technology. We're struggling for the first 15 minutes just to connect to the Zoom. And now here is this robot dealing with a patient, dealing with a user in a critical condition. 15 minutes is a lot of time. So we have to make sure that things are not as happened 15 minutes ago, right? We want to make it go and fly. So service availability, integrity, how do you guarantee that? Now think of it, the third parties, as I was talking about, like you say, oh, we will compute to the cloud, and the cloud people, they sit there happily and they see all your data. That's possible. And think of it, like the smartwatch, no, not the smartwatch, the other one, the smartphone that I have, I try to collect with the health data related. I know many of us do that app on and then collect it, and then they scroll down and it says, remember, this data that we're collecting through this app is either processed in South Korea or it's in America as per the regulation and policy that we have with Samsung. So I said, that's it. I'm not going to install it because my data, the GDPR is not going to come into effect because they are going to process as per the law and regulations sit somewhere in another country. And then they are collecting the data from here. Then how do I trust it? So it's very challenging if you think of it and very carefully, technologically, if you start looking into it. So RAS can be weaponized. When I say this, so when we did a project last year for the PSRC research scoping project. So when I use this word, so we were discussing, so why do you use the word weaponized? That's too strong. I said, no, that's not true. I'm going to use that word. And I'll tell you why. Why? If security is not taken into account, right? What will happen? We can make the system malfunction. We can take control over the functionality of the system that is running once it's connected into the internet. If we say it's not connected, that's fine. If it is connected, no problem. I'll get into it. There are some groups sitting in the back who are pen tester and ethical hackers, and they will know what I'm talking about, and the rest of us as well. So this is true. So it can be weaponized. Okay? We can misguide, we can misdirect, and so on. So this, oh no, it's fine. So if we go to the next slide, there are a lot more actually, but I'm just trying to give you a scene. So if you look at the unauthorized user can access, that's the nightmare that you can even imagine, right? We don't want our children to even access our account. Probably you don't want your wife to access your account. In this case, even unauthorized user is going to access your account and see what is in there. That's a nightmare, right? We don't want that to happen. And then think of it, there will be no limit and no boundary. What about the user data? Like, it will become an open system. Like, come and attack me. Yeah? Like, come and collect the data that I'm storing. Come and collect and see the data that I'm sending to the cloud. So that's what is going to happen. I know most of the time we focus too much on the functionality of the system, and security becomes the least priority in any design. And then we people come in when things goes bad and things goes wrong. Why not rejoin them from the start? And that's one of the key things, that whatever technique that I'm looking forward to now and in the future is like, why do we think at the end? Why not we think from the start when you are building it? You know, when we build this house, we know that where the window should be, where the door should be. We decide, why not we think from the design perspective and say where the security feature should be, where it should start, when it should stand, when it should evolve, and so on. So we don't want the hackers and any form of intrusion to take place in this system or in this mechanism. So there are plenty, but it will not end. But I'm going to jump very quickly because this could be a boring topic for those of you who already know. So think of it in terms of the confidentiality, think of it in terms of the integrity, availability, when you are connected, maybe with a smart IoT system, with the cloud, and then you need to think about the intrusion that could happen, the detection mechanism that should be available, and even the cyber threat intelligence. Why is this attack happening? Why is he interested in my data? Why is he trying to attack me all the time? You know, normally he doesn't do that, but he started attacking my system. So there must be a reason. So we want to find out. And that's where the cyber threat intelligence comes into picture, and so on. So it's literally limitless in terms of what the cyber system can do. Now, if we think in terms of the privacy, this is the most complicated part. I don't know if you will agree with me or not, but for me, I think like security part is easier than dealing with the privacy part. Because as I say, the regulation, the compliances, the law is not going to protect your life and your data. That will be there only when something happens. That's where the enforcement directorate, the police, the army, they will come. But damage is done, lost, life, data gone. So we have to think. So for me, when I'm thinking of designing certain things, like privacy becomes too complicated because this is very subjective in nature. What I think is private, sounds might not think as private at all. What's it seen as private, I might think that's very important, you know? So the privacy, like, it becomes like subjective in terms of probably the belief. So it could be subjective in terms of the culture, geographical reason, you know, it's so complex, right? Even in the way how we have been brought up, our upbringing, you know, the reason, the place where we grow, so many things. So how do we then set it right and say, okay, I want this robot to understand what privacy means according to James? How do I customize that? How do I customize this robot to make this robot understand and say, this is what privacy means according to the Japanese culture? How do I say this with respect to the belief system of certain group of people? Because this robot, when you are building this, you are trying to build this to make everybody adopt it, everybody use it, not just for me, and then, oh, it doesn't work for this group of people. No, it should work for every group of people. So if that is the case, it's going to be very, very challenging. Think of it like I said, who, what, why, where, and how is going to be impacted when it comes to privacy. And then I give this equation. Some of you may agree with me, may disagree, but this is my strong belief. If you want a good quality of service, of whatever, whether from a doctor, from a nurse, from this robot, it's going to demand your private information more and more. The more private information this system has, the better service you'll be able to provide. Think of it in terms of hospital. When you go, there are things that you don't want to respond, but you have to, because if you don't, you might end up being treated differently, right? The things that they want to check, they want to know, how did it happen? So the more detailed, the more private information you provide, the better service, the more quality service, the quicker, more effective service you will get. And this will be the same when we are dealing with a robot. If you ask a vague question, you will get a vague answer. You ask a very specific question, you get a very specific, based on the information that he or this robot or she or he, I don't know, has been collecting from you. So think of it like ChatGPT. We've been using it, don't we? Like when we throw in, it throws out information. I want quality information, not just an information that is so generic. If I want that information, now he needs to know more about me. Then only you'll be able to provide more specific information, customized according to my need, customized according to my requirement, and so on. So I believe strongly that quality of service, unfortunately or fortunately, has directly proportional link with the privacy. The more privacy we compromise, the better quality of service we will get. And then the more complicated, if you look at this side, unintended data disclosure. How do we stop this from happening? Now there is a robot sitting in this room. He had no idea, or she has no idea. Now, intentionally, unintentionally, if we don't have the mechanism in place, your information is going to be leaked out everywhere. Think of the inappropriate data disclosure. Now, we are talking all grown up, and my son, 8-year-old, sitting there. Now, there might be things that is appropriate for us, might not be appropriate for him. Now, so the audience understanding the context is very important for the robot. Otherwise, it'll be kind of a bit clueless. You know, people will say, no, I don't want this robot. He has no idea that my son was sitting there, my daughter was sitting there, but was saying all the stupid things that I don't want him to say. Okay, think of it, your Alexa, with your son and the daughter, if they have an access, they can go and speak, and they can even come and ask, what was the order last day, last month, last year? Probably, Alexa will spit out all the information that you have been ordering. Okay, be careful, be careful. Okay, so if you are using Alexa to order stuff, don't do it in open, all right? Keep it. Be careful, otherwise you'll be in trouble. Okay. So it's seamless continuous authentication for access continuity. This one is very interesting. That's one of my research area in terms of the domain that I really love to explore. Because think of it like when we say authentication, we do it once and we stop. See, we authenticate the computer, we stop and we're using it, right? But when a robot has a service and has to provide a service, now really the system needs to know continuously whom he is giving the service. Is it the authenticated user I'm giving the service? Forget about even the authentic, am I giving the service to the right person whom I am supposed to be giving? So think of it. So that part is going to be very interesting. How do you continually authenticate as you give service? So some of you might say, oh, we can use voice recognition. And those of you who are working in AI, you know that if you have a snapshot of my talk, you can regenerate my entire voice, right? Give a text, we'll start speaking like chips. So how do you even trust the system? Right? So it's very interesting. So where things can go. AI has been so helpful and it become an enemy for security people. Okay, so in those regards. So disciplining the rash. How do I even discipline them? How do we discipline our children? We want to discipline. We want them to talk. We want this robot to talk at the right time, at the right place, to the right people, to the right scenario and right context. How do we do that? That's going to be very challenging. I told you. Let me remind you, the rule, the law, the regulation, the compliances is not going to help you. If embarrassment happened, it has happened. Okay, that's it. You have got the embarrassment, right? So if we think of the user constraint again, okay, privacy. How does it link with user constraint, right? Things that you want to say, you can't say. You want to control, you can't control. It could be because of disability. It could be because you can't really converse in the language that the robot can converse. In the way the robot understands, you will not be able to because probably of your disability or because of my disability, or because of my lack of knowledge or lack of skill. So that user constraint is going to become a really challenging aspect. So how do we design a system in such a way that robot does everything and we do the minimum? So most of the time security is we do the maximum and the system does the minimum. I say, okay, remember, it's a 2-factor authentication. I don't know, 3-factor authentication. It's just dumping on us. Why not we dump on him? And say, you take care of the authentication part and make sure that nobody accesses except me. How do we do that? So those are the things that we need to think about. Scalability will another one big issue. Think of it, I'm a robot, it's very expensive, and I'm going to serve all of you. Ooh, I have to remember each one of you. And I have to remember what service you have been subscribed to. And then I don't end up giving the wrong service to the wrong person. And I don't end up disclosing the information of Mr. A to Mr. B, and so on. So that scalability of service that this care robot is going to do is going to be another very challenging aspect that we need to take into account. Oh, did I jump? Okay, now, as I was saying, I want to reiterate and re-emphasize this, because this is another domain that is going to be very interesting. Now, we can't, children, remember the password. I remember my son's password most of the time if I put a complicated one, right? I don't have to say, you remember it. How to enforce the children? Say, you remember it. This is the way how you access it. Now that's why we parents come into picture, don't we? We say, okay, parental control, support, help, assistance. So when we provide help and support to the children, it could be to the normal, to be somebody who has a mental or physical condition, whatever may be the case. Think of it in terms of the elderly people. Say, oh, remembering. Think of it, remembering. How many of them can really remember what we have been teaching them? Okay, even the password, or maybe the login system or two-factor. How many of our children can even remember it? Skills and knowledge. Children, they're learning ABC and 1 + 1, and they say, okay, come on, you remember this. The cyber skill set. No, don't dump on them. That's going to be too much. If that is the case, how do we design? Now, when I'm talking about this, remember, children with a physical condition, mental condition, the parents are not going to be around all the time. We are thinking of like how the robot can be like a nurse, supporting, caring, talking, interacting. So it's not about a parent coming and then supporting and provide interpreting for the children. That's not what we are talking about. So that's why things are going to be very challenging. Could be in terms of remembering, could be in terms of skill set, could be in terms of knowledge. Same thing for the elderly and older people. It's not only about not having the knowledge. We may have the knowledge now, but when I'm 85, I'm sure like I will even forget my password. I may even forget my name. Like if things goes really bad. So that could happen. But we want to support those kind of people so that independent quality living is provided. If that is the case, we have to take up that responsibility and be able to provide the mechanism and then dump all this difficulty to the robot, and then we just use the system. Now think of it. In terms of the authentication, let's forget about the password. Is that, okay, biometrics, so useful. Oh, I'll do a face scan, and whenever you scan my face, he'll remember me. But the moment you walked away, that's it, the system is already open. How do you continuously authenticate? So, okay, there's the camera with a robot just going around your face all the time. That's very highly impractical, right? If that, and say, okay, I'll use the gate authentication, and that's one of the PhD project, one of my other PhD students is doing. So it's very interesting. If you look at the system, say, okay, I will use the gate to authenticate. Yeah, it works. However, the biggest challenge is, what if I'm not in the normal state? What if I'm not feeling well? What if I'm sick? And most of the work that people have been working, if you look, they always control the environment, and then they will say, walk this in this situation, in this plane surface, and they will say, study the gate pattern. Now, what if my house doesn't involve plane? It's all climbing up the stairs. And then will I be authenticated? I have a fever and I'm sick. I'm carrying something on my right side of the back, and I have my gate data to be collected on my watch on my left side. Will it work? So many things. Like, it's very interesting if we start exploring it. So if I'm running, will it still authenticate? Yes or no? Clueless, because if you just Google inside the paper, you will hardly find any, right? Because it's too complicated. But we want to find, if it's too complicated, we must know what should be the alternative solution. So we are exploring that as well in one of the PhD work. So continuity is a big challenge. Like I said, I want to continue to authenticate, even with gate. Okay, even with gate, it's very challenging, right? So if that is, even with face, as I've told you, voice, forget about it. And then you say fingerprint. Many of you have been holding pizza and the cup. I don't know, there was somebody has hold there probably, and you have left all your fingerprint there, right? I can recreate it, and if you were using a fingerprint, that's it. Your password is gone, right? So that's not good, and you can't change it. That's the worst part. You can't change it. If it was a password, you say somebody got it, I changed it. But here in this case, we use fingerprint. Somebody got it. How do you change it? So see, we have to think like in practicality how it should be. So it's going to be very, very interesting. Now this interaction is happening like direct face-to-face, as you can see a lot. That is the biggest challenge. Now, if I was doing through a laptop, if I was doing through a phone, I can encrypt and use the security mechanism, invoke the AES and the RSA algorithm, and then I say encrypt it and send it. How do you encrypt when I'm talking to all of you? I'm talking live. If you can hear me, somebody behind me can also hear me. Whether it's intended, unintended, appropriate, not appropriate, that's it. If that is the case, it's going to be very challenging. We must think of a way on how to secure it. So probably that's where the challenge is, and that's where I'm interested in highlighting some of the aspects. But before I go into that, this is another one critical one where another PhD student is working on. So it's for me, it's very interesting. I don't know if it is interesting, let me know. So think of it in terms of access control. So it's, I want to access data from this robot. So the traditional one say, oh, read, write, execute. Okay, you are a normal user, you have an access to this file, to this folder. You are a root, you have access to this file, to this folder. That's traditional, gone. Now we have to think beyond. Why? Now think of it. Now if my data is unstructured, if my data is a recorded voice, that whatever we have been talking over the last probably 30 minutes is recorded, and somebody wants to access all the particular information that is appropriate to this particular individual. That means now I have to scan through the voice, the conversation, the talk that I have given, on only the appropriate bit has to be picked up. Think of it if it's a video. There are bits that is appropriate, there are bits that is not appropriate. What is meant by appropriate? What is meant by not appropriate? Now, as for suppose a child is watching that movie, and then okay, everything's fine, and then there is some content that you don't want the child to see, it's restricted. Want to jump, right? And access. Want to jump and access. Think of it dynamically. So that will be the future in terms of how the access control. When the data is not structured, because most of the conversation, the data that we report, is not by writing, it's not by typing. When you go to the doctor, what do? We just talk, right? Either through mic or through video recording. That's it. Nobody is going to say, okay, you keep speaking, I'll keep typing, whatever you are saying. No. We are talking, having a conversation. Same thing with the robot. The robot is not going to say, oh, let me type, or let me convert what you say into text. We can do that. We can transcribe it, and we can do that as well. You know, how accurate it will be. Many times what I say is not what's being recorded in the YouTube, some of my YouTube videos. Maybe my accent is so thick and so horrible that it is saying something else. Oh, that's not what I said, but it is saying something else. So I said, oh no, this is not fair. But please go back and listen to my original video, then you will know what I'm talking about. You see? So you see that it's going to be very interesting and very challenging. How do I control that access? But think of it, the requirement by the engineer, probably by the nurse, by the doctor, by friends and families, it's going to be all different. There are things probably you don't want your friends to know when the robot comes and talks to you. He has all the information with him, but you want him to filter it out and say things that is appropriate for a friend and a family, that is appropriate for a child, that is appropriate for the engineer, that is appropriate for the nurse and the doctor. ChatGPT is not going to help in this regard, all right? So it's going to be very interesting and very complex in nature. Now, if we think of this one, this is where I find it very exciting. So I was reading about this, and it really excites me because, like, the social adaptability and the cultural sensitivity. Now, as a robot, because we say we want it to be a care robot. So if it's a care robot, this is nurse that they're taking care of. We want them to have some kind of, social adaptivity or socially adaptive. Understand? Oh, he's coming from this country. Okay, in their culture, this is appropriate and this is not appropriate. Now, how do I do that? No, but even we human beings make a mistake, don't we? You go to different country. You don't even know the culture and the tradition there. You don't even know the social sensitivity there. And then we might end up doing the same thing that we have been doing here. And there, when you go, they say, that's not what you should be doing. That's not how you should be behaving. Now you say, think of a robot. Knows nothing. We have to train them. Otherwise, it's going to be very challenging. When it comes to the privacy preservation aspect, number one, I really thought this is going to protect and preserve, and respect my culture, my tradition, and then said this robot knows nothing, right? That's preservation of privacy is going to be affected. And if that is the case, obviously it will affect the acceptance. But whether we like it or not, it's going to be. Things that we can do in Saudi Arabia, we can't do here in the UK. Things that we can do in America, maybe we can't do in South Korea and Japan. So we have to understand the social adaptive nature or adaptiveness or the cultural sensitivity. And we need that to be embedded in the robot. I don't know how, but we have to do it. So those are the kind of things that we are looking forward as a solution when we talk of preserving the privacy, right? Understanding the social context, not just the regulations and the law and so on. I'm not interested in that. Okay, so I'm almost finishing, all right? So here is this security and privacy mechanism and technique we want to embed into the system from the start. So, okay, here is it. Now let's test the resilience. I don't know how many of you can remember that Elon Musk when he did his Cybertruck. You remember that video? Demo and he hit and crashed and he didn't know how to just make a fake smile and he didn't know what to say. And then you see, like when we do the resilience testing, that is where it's going to be really going to test, is it going to really work or not? And here is a system that doesn't consider any of the security mechanism and technique. privacy mechanism and technique, and we just say, okay, we are going to use it. So it's very interesting. The government, or if you look at the calls, they are talking a lot of AI and robot, but if you look at the call relating to security, privacy, not so much money in there. But at the end, after they build all this, they say, okay, security people, let's think of a solution. And they say, why don't we think from the start? That's the thing that I have been telling. When I build this house, I want to know from the start where the ventilation should be, where the door and window should be. So that way, it will be more effective. Where is the place where it generates the data? Where is the module and the point where it generates the data? Where is the point where it encapsulates and then encode and decode, encrypt and decrypt? We need to know. Otherwise, we are going to be in a really challenging situation. I don't know if you remember 3M, I think it's in Toronto, Canada. Like they were having this £1 million put in that system and say, if you can break it, take it. Everybody is jumping and kicking. And, no, that's not happening. In a real cyber world, there is no rule. There, the rule is you can't use a truck. You can't use a hammer. You can't use a truck to pull it down. Let's say use your hand and leg and the bulletproof glass and say steal the million. Who in the world is going to steal the million? Right? But in a real cyber world, we don't have a rule like that. We are finding a way on how to get into the system. If that is the case, 3M gone, right? So trust is going to be a real big issue. So if trust is violated, if decimated, what will happen? Gone. Adoption, acceptance, all collapse. I'm not trying to make security and privacy important, but it is important. That's what we should know. That's what I'm trying to reiterate as I'm giving this talk. So it's not just me now. So when we did this study last year, it just pops out. The trust, the privacy, the security. So when we recruit these people in order to conduct this research, so I specifically say you must not have a degree in computer science and in cybersecurity or information security. If you have a knowledge, or if you have learned, if you have studied, you are teaching, you are not part of this research. So we have a Darnell community. So they were so graciously, they were willing to take part, the community. So we say, okay, come on. And then we started doing a demo of the robot and what it can do, what it can't do. And we say, okay, what do you think? What do you think is important? When you deal with your private and sensitive information, privacy, boom. Security, boom. Trust, boom. You can see the importance. So I'm not making this up. And these are the people who doesn't know security, who doesn't know privacy related, how to manage and control. However, they also think that is equally important when it comes to adoption. There are a lot of other things. However, there are certain things that I want to highlight before I finish. So think of it like have reservation, like on how the care robot collects and processes. Yes, majority of things that, we are careful how it is collecting. It is collecting later on, who can access this information? You have collected, but who can access this information later on? So they're worried how it is being collected. Who can use this information? And whom it is sharing? Those are the things that they are concerned about. 93% of the people of the survey, so there are 30 people taking part. Okay, so we're kind of reiterating. And it should not be transmitted, should be transmitted securely, shared, processed, and stored securely. So that's interesting. So overwhelming majority thinks that, yes, that must be the case if we are dealing with private, sensitive information. Now, 70% says, unless security and privacy issues are addressed, RAS cannot be trusted or will be trusted with low confidence. So that's one more evidence to say that it's important. And later on, if you look privacy, that there was, if you look at the 96, probably it was 1% who say, who thinks it's important. However, the majority, overwhelming majority says, yes, user privacy must be protected and safeguarded. They think it's really, really important. And overall, they say, okay, after we have done all, in fact, there are a lot more questions, but I just don't want to show it. There's too many. So it's 100% feels that a safe adoption of RAS, we need to make it secure and private. So in general, everybody seems to agree. If everybody seems to agree, why not we start thinking about it from now on? But generally, we don't. That's why I propose this approach. I know everybody does it. However, I really reiterate this because this should be the way forward. The design, we should think of secure by design. It means from the start of the design, the mechanism and technique that we incorporate must be incorporated, not something that we add at the end of the product. Okay? Most of them we do that. Here is a laptop and say, oh, have you put an antivirus, install it, download it. So at the end, they say, okay, here's a security feature, download it. No. We have to think from the start of the design. Even the privacy aspect, we want to think from the start of the design. If that's not the case, there will be an issue on the trust. If there is issue on the trust, I finish by saying there will be a challenge in adoption. Thank you very much. I think I'll run out.